Good evening, America, and welcome to the Monday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you, as always, from Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. We begin tonight with new congressional testimony in President Joe Biden's impeachment inquiry. Hunter Biden's former business partner, Eric Schwerin. We told you, watch out for this guy. He's going to be important. He told investigators he performed years of work on Joe Biden's finances back when Joe Biden was vice president. That work included paying bills, preparing taxes, even filling out financial disclosure forms for the then sitting president. And Joe Biden, well, he never paid a dime. Essentially, a sitting vice president accepted free work. And then at the end of the Obama-Biden administration, Eric Schwerin was appointed to a plum federal job, a commission, before Obama and Biden left office. That's not all. Schwerin also dropped another bombshell. He told Congress that he never saw Joe Biden ever loan any money to his brother James Biden or his sister-in-law Sarah Biden. That claim potentially undercuts Joe Biden's story that he got the money he got from his brother, which was drawn from a failing healthcare company and a Chinese energy firm, was a repayment for a loan, except there's no documentation of the loan. And Schwerin says he never saw any money go from Joe Biden to the in-laws. So that's going to be a big one. Schwerin's claims adds to the evidence calling into question the Biden's whole family story. We'll have more on this in the second block of the show when Congressman Glenn Grothman, a member of the impeachment inquiry, joins us. But first, let's welcome my amazing co-host, Amanda Hedry. She joins us from Los Angeles. She's got some other big headlines on her radar. Amanda, what's cooking tonight?
Good evening, John. Yeah, in reference to your story, whoever thought that accountants would be so exciting? You usually don't pay attention to accountants unless you get a letter from the IRS, and you've got your eye on it for a different reason. But yes, let's get into some legal news. Former President Donald Trump has been unable to secure that $454 million bond. That's the outrageous amount in the civil fraud judgment against him in the asset valuation case ruled on by Judge Arthur Engoron. And he's got to post that in order to appeal. So Trump offered last month to post a $100 million appeal bond rather than the full amount as the process plays out in court. Now, the judge denied his offer, so Trump has until next week to secure that full amount. Now, on the immigration front, Jason Riley, who is the father of murdered UGA nursing student Laken Riley, sat down with NBC's Today Show. And in stating what most Americans consider to be pretty indubitable, he said that his daughter's illegal immigrant murderer might not have been in the United States had our southern border been secure. The disaster at the border is increasingly highlighted in polling. Last month, Gallup found that 28% of Americans overall said immigration is the United States' most important problem, up from 20% in January and 9% last August in their polling. Now, meanwhile, in the tech world, a new report out by Media Research Center found that Google has interfered in U.S. elections dozens of times since 2008. The report identified 41 times over the past 16 years where Google interfered in the last, in the last 16 years, a claim that they have vehemently denied. In the report, it says that, quote, in every case, Google harmed the candidates, regardless of party, who threatened its left-wing candidate of choice, unquote. And to finish things off with a bit of sporting news, last night after multiple conferences completed their championship play, the NCAA March Madness brackets were released. Both mine and John's teams will be dancing in the tourney. John's Marquette Golden Eagles are a number 2 seed and my Auburn Tigers are a number 4 seed. So, John, if our guys end up meeting on the hardwood, I think we're going to have a game-watching special edition of our show.
I like it. Let's set it up now. You got to get your brackets in tonight. Don't forget that.
Yeah, that's right.
Good.
Yep.
Good stuff. Well, listen, there's been so much going on in the courts, and I think the courts have become one of the key battlegrounds for where the biggest policy crises in America are going to be settled. Our first guest tonight is on the forefront of fighting some of the most important battles, particularly when it comes to regulatory fiat. She is the Attorney General of the great state of Iowa, Brena Bird. She joins us right now. General Bird, great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You have some really big cases working up to the court, but perhaps none bigger than the challenge you and 9 other attorney generals filed to the SEC climate disclosure rule. Tell us why this is such an important moment in the battle between regulators and freedom in America.
Well, freedom is so important, and we have seen the federal government, particularly the Biden administration, whenever they can't get something through Congress, they just try to go and do it on their own. Through the power of the presidency and the executive branch. But our laws and Constitution don't work that way. In order to do what they are trying to do with that SEC rule, requiring greenhouse gas emissions disclosures and other things that go beyond what the law allows. They literally have to pass a law in order to do that. Instead, they're just trying to do it on their own, just forcing that through the system. So we are taking them to court right here in our district. We're taking them to court along with a total of 9 states.
Yeah, it seems like this is another Chevron issue. I wanted to ask you about when I look at the companies that are going to be targeted by this, specifically with respect to the reporting on carbon emissions, leftist businesses out there, that's something that they blast on their marquee. It's a marketing point, a selling point for their businesses. It seems to me that on the other side, this targets conservative businesses more. Do you agree?
It does. So this rule would especially target agriculture, energy, just to name a few important things. And it's just absolutely wrong that it does that, but they fundamentally don't understand just how important agriculture is. People need food to eat, they need fuel for their vehicles, and both of those sectors are targeted by this rule by the Biden administration. And I'll add this, that rule, it is illegal. The law does not allow them to do that. They can't force this through the SEC process. The Securities and Exchange Commission is supposed to be there to keep fraud out of investing, to make sure that people are playing according to the rules and disclosing financial information. It has nothing to do with climate activism.
Yeah, such an important point that your lawsuit made a really clear case for. One of the extraordinary things I've seen in just reading up on this in the last few days is the extraordinary costs that every company in America would have to pay if these regulations actually got into effect. So can you tell us a little bit about tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands a year that companies would have to pay just to comply with a new regulation that, by the way, Congress never gave the SEC the power to do anyways?
Yeah, it's a high cost for an illegal regulation. And we all know that those kinds of costs are passed along to the rest of us, the consumers, when we're buying things. And so it's just another way that the Biden administration, with their big regulation, is hurting the economy. They're not following the laws and constitution that we have in place. And that's why we take them to court and we hold their feet to the fire, because right now, with what's going on in Washington, it's good to be an attorney general, because we're the ones that can stop this illegal immigration in its tracks in court.
Great point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been incredible to see states, AGs acting in this manner. I wanted to ask you, though, with respect to farming, so much of our produce, there's been a really big concern recently over our produce and agricultural products coming from overseas. This is going to target farmers in particular, and therefore it seems to me the result is going to be we're going to have to be getting even more products from overseas, right?
Oh, that's exactly right. And also realize, with all of the things that they are doing in the Biden administration to hurt American workers and American businesses, that means that we will see more and more products coming in from places that don't have the level of good regulations that we have here in this country. So it's a very important point that you're making right there. This act by the Biden administration, it makes it hard for Americans and American workers, American businesses to keep their head above water and provide a competitive product.
So important. We lose sight of that so often. General Bird, there is another issue that you've dived into, and I think it's really important because people look at it and say, why are we continuing to treat Iran so nicely when, in fact, they're behind almost every proxy war attack that we see in the Red Sea, in Israel, all across the world. You joined 12, I think, AGs asking the Biden administration, would you please stop funding Iran and its terrorist activities? Why is this an important point for states to make to the president?
Well, it's important because as a prosecutor, I know one thing: follow the money. Follow the money. And we know that Iran has served as the world banker to terrorists. And with what the Biden administration has done with lifting the freeze on those accounts so that terrorists can get at $10 billion in funds that Iran has. And we know that they have funded terrorists around the world and that they have ties to terrorism. So this is important. The Biden administration needs to stop looking the other way when it comes to terrorism. They have to start holding the line. It's a dangerous world that we live in, and they need to start acting like they know what's going on for a change.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And it certainly seems like the Biden administration knows how their actions are going to affect Iran. You lift the sanctions, it brings more cash on hand for Iran. The money goes to their proxies, which includes the Houthis, and then they attack our troops. Where on that diagram am I getting it wrong?
Oh, I think you're exactly right. And that's the whole problem. You've done a great job of summing that up. I mean, with what the Biden administration is doing, we know that it endangers more Americans around the world. It endangers Israel. It endangers our troops. And we know this is happening at a time when we are seeing more and more suspected terrorists coming across the southern border. It really couldn't come at a worse time. And they just need to put a stop to it. They should not allow those funds to be unfrozen so that Iran can make them available to terrorists and terrorist supporters.
So common sense, and yet none of it's happening in Washington right now. It's remarkable. Joan Bird, we got about a minute left. Real quickly, usually a letter like this can be a prelude to some future litigation or legal action that maybe the states take. Is there an avenue of legal action that states could take to maybe force the Biden administration, either on the border or on Iran, to tighten up security?
Well, we are pursuing every avenue to keep America safe. But let me say this, President Biden should just do the right thing, and he should shut this down right now. $10 billion available to terrorists. That's very dangerous and will make the world a much less safe place. And he's also funded UNRWA, giving funding to that organization $1 billion. Now, that was money that President Trump put a stop to and was no longer handing over. But we know that when American money goes to fund terrorists, bad things happen. And we have a responsibility in this world to do the right thing. So first and foremost, he should do the right thing and stop this. But we'll look for every means that we have at our disposal to hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah, so important, so common sense, just like the people in the great state of Iowa. Attorney General Brena Bird, what a great opportunity to have you on today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. But before we do, let me toss over to a special offer we got for you before we hit the commercial break. I think you'll enjoy it. We'll be right back. Hello, America. John Solomon here from Just the News, No Noise. You may have seen a few news stories over on justthenews.com that talk about home title theft or thieves stealing your home equity. But when is the last time you checked on your home's title? Is it still in your name? And is it secure? There's a growing and devastating crime called house stealing. I'll be quick and to the point. You need to join me in protecting your home's title from scammers and identity thieves who will take over your home's title and wipe you out financially. The FBI, I've talked to a lot of people. This is a real crime. The title to our homes are easily found online. A criminal, a renter, even a family member can simply forge your signature on a home sale form and refile it as the new owner. Bam, your home is no longer in your name. And get this, the home title thief can do even more. After they steal your home title, they can take loans out on your home, draining your equity. What could make this theft even worse is that you could be stuck trying to prove that you didn't commit the fraud against the lenders. That's a long and painful process. But with Home Title Lock, you don't need to be nervous about a thief getting a hold of your home's title. Home Title Lock is behind the premier detection technology that protects your personal information. They can detect activity or something suspicious instantaneously going on, and then they mobilize quickly to shut it down. I encourage everyone to join me by going over to HometitleLock.com and use the promo code JUSTNEWS. Once you do that, you'll get a free comprehensive scan of your home title and get 30 days of their legendary Home Title Lock protection for free. So head on over to HometitleLock.com and be sure to use the promo code JUSTNEWS.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We are just a few days out from the Hunter Biden hearing on Capitol Hill, one that he declined to attend after calling for it for months. Now, lucky for us, we are joined by someone who will be participating in the hearing. He's Congressman Glenn Grothman of the great state of Wisconsin, and he joins us now. Glenn Grothman, Congressman, you corrected me on that pronunciation last summer, and I haven't forgotten, but I did for a split second. Congressman Grothman, thank you for being here. Sarah, I want to ask you about what is going to be taking place on Wednesday. I think that you and all the members of Oversight belong on the World Poker Tour because I've never seen a more embarrassing bluff called out. Hunter Biden has been saying for months that he wanted public testimony. That's how he wanted it to be. He wanted to speak to the American people, and now he's not showing up. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think he doesn't want to embarrass himself. I think we're at the point where the more information comes out, it is very apparent that the Biden family, including Joe Biden, were acting to benefit Hunter Biden and were in contact with Hunter Biden. I kind of feel like a policeman where, everybody in the police force knows this guy is guilty. We don't quite have enough information to get the conviction. But I think we are so close in so many ways, and it's very obvious the reason Hunter Biden doesn't want to be there is because he's afraid he's going to slip up, or he doesn't want to embarrass him and his father on national television.
Yeah, I think that's right. Congressman, there is a lot of options in the next 6 months for Congress to pursue to try to create some accountability. One is impeachment articles. Maybe they get sent over to the Senate. Doesn't look like the Senate will do anything. Another is to develop criminal referrals for the Justice Department, a future Justice Department, maybe to bring some accountability went on here. Could you tell us, where you think this is going to happen, where the American people can get some accountability for really one of the largest influence peddling schemes I've ever seen in my life?
Right. I think referrals is the way to go. To be honest, we have got to remove Joe Biden from office. And I think insofar as we go down this path, it's important that justice be served, right? The public will demand and should demand that something happened to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, given the fact, for example, in Ukraine, when that prosecutor was fired and Joe Biden is bragging about it, it's hard to think of any other rationalization or reason that happening other than that Hunter Biden was weighing in with his father and having his father do things because the cash was transferred, right? That's what it sure looks like. On the other hand, big political picture, I think sadly, the public is not as excited about that as they are him completely ignoring the border, completely out of control on inflation, maybe completely out of control on his racial divisiveness. And insofar as we focus on the minutia of Hunter Biden selling his father's influence, I think the more we go down that path, it'll take America's eyes off these other issues, which I think are more likely to lead to victory in November.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Absolutely. Sir, I want to shift gears. Misinformation and disinformation have been hot topics at the Supreme Court today with oral arguments in Missouri v. Biden. But there was also some misinformation/disinformation that was still floating around the internet this weekend with respect to President Trump's comments about bloodbath. You had Keith Olbermann, Joe Scarborough, Joe Walsh, breathlessly reporting on President Trump talking about a bloodbath with, I think they were inferring some type of civil war. That obviously was not what President Trump was talking about. How do we get through to these people that when you consistently try to pass on these hoax, the American people eventually are going to find out the truth?
Well, I hope we all catch on to the truth. I mean, this is one of the most outlandish things. But the idea that they would say that President Trump was talking about a bloodbath of American citizens is just so absurd on its face. And I think we have to get out there and tell our children or grandchildren or coworkers what's going on. My fear is that there are still Americans out there who listen to these networks, which should be totally discredited. But we have to use this as an example to educate our friends the degree to which you can't believe a thing that these other networks are saying. I mean, it's hard to believe when I was a child, things like NBC, that meant something. Now it means that you're entirely in the tank making up things to try to defeat Donald Trump. And I feel sorry for Donald Trump because I think never before in history have we had a mainstream media this in the tank for one presidential candidate or the other.
Yeah, that's true. There's no doubt about it. The record is clear on that. Congressman, you've done so much to highlight what's going on at the border. And I think you look at the polling, that's the number one issue right now for most states, most Americans. It doesn't seem like anything's getting better. Lake and Riley, just another day and another horrific story. It's so awful what's going on. What are you seeing? Is there any movement by the Biden administration to tighten things up, or are they just doing a rope-a-dope?
We have two chances to try to do something before November, to force Joe Biden to do something. One is we could try to hold up some of the spending bills that we plan on passing this week and say, no, Joe Biden, we're not going to pass these bills unless you take action at the border. The other thing is we can hold up aid for Ukraine and try to force him to do something. Because I'll tell you, it's more than just polling, and it's the American public is concerned about this. It's the future of America. Every month that Joe Biden doesn't act, and he doesn't need Congress to act, any month he doesn't get this back down to the 15 or 20,000 a month that Donald Trump had, is another month we're going to get 200,000 people here. 300,000 people. How are we going to get those people out of the United States? They shouldn't be here under any circumstances. We know a lot of them are going to come here. They're going to take advantage of the welfare system. They're going to break our laws. We've heard testimony on my committee that the immigrants coming here, the illegals, are committing crimes at 3 or 4 times the rate of the native born. We're going to lose America altogether unless we act now. And it's important that the public catch on to force Joe Biden to do something if he has any chance of getting reelected in August. I'm reelected in November.
Yeah. Sir, you read tea leaves really well. We sat in a diner with you last year and you told us that immigration would be the #1 issue and that Donald Trump should focus on that. With respect to Wisconsin, it's obviously not a geographic border with our southern border, but you look at the Lake and Riley case, there are a number of esteemed universities in Wisconsin, like John's alma mater, Marquette. This could come to a campus anywhere across the country. What happened in Georgia, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you this, America's one country. You cannot have Arizona and Texas disappear and say it's not going to affect Wisconsin, right? It is going to affect the United States overwhelmingly. It's going to affect public policy throughout the country. It's going to affect the debt throughout the country. And, you know, when our country was founded, it was John Adams or Ben Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. To keep it, you need people who are freedom-loving people, more than just hardworking people, freedom-loving people who want to hold on to our Constitution. And you cannot collect people from all around the world who have not been educated in our love of limited government without permanently changing the United States. This is the #1 issue. I'm glad the public realizes it's the #1 issue. I'm not sure they always realized it, but I'm glad they realize it's the #1 issue, because we will lose this country, if not for us, for our children, if we do not stop the spigot at the border and turn around and kick a lot of these people back out, because these are not people who've been raised to have the limited view of government that our forefathers expected us to have.
Yeah, such a great point, no doubt. Sir, people look at Washington and say, I think bipartisan feels dead, but actually it isn't. You are working on a very important project to stop age discrimination, particularly against senior citizens, and you reached across the aisle. You got a Democratic co-sponsor. Tell us what's going on and why this is an important piece of legislation.
Well, right. I think the one part of discrimination that is a problem in this country is age discrimination. You know anybody who got laid off when they're 45, 50, 55, 60, unless they have a very specific skill. If you're a plumber, you always got a job, right? But unless you have a specific skill, people turn the other way. You're the first one to get fired, and you get let go because your health insurance costs are higher, perhaps. You're the last one to pick up because people know sometimes older people a little bit slower. They're used to hiring 22, 25 years old. So it's important to introduce legislation to strengthen the protections of the one group in our society who is being discriminated against, and that's the older Americans.
Yeah, great point.
Amen. Sir, before we let you go, spending is a problem in Washington. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're talking about. But one of the ways that we can fix it, or one of the first ways you have to tackle it, is with transparency. If we don't have visibility on the issue, it's very hard to tackle. You've introduced the Appropriations Transparency Act. Tell us about it, sir. Right now on appropriation bills. And so you understand, most spending that the government does every 2 years, overwhelmingly, the Congress votes on, not mandatory spending, but most spending is through the appropriation bills. Right now, we do not have to get the in-depth information we get from the Congressional Budget Office on other, quite frankly, less important bills. We've got to make sure we get the same thing when bills come out of the Appropriations Committee, not only for congressmen to make the right decisions, but for the press corps and for the public to know what's going on. So we're going to be introduce this bill, put these bills on the same footing as other appropriations or spending bills, and hopefully in the long run, it will result in a little bit more fiscal responsibility.
Important stuff.
Such important work. Congressman Grothman, we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, sir. And we're going to have you back on again very soon.
Very good.
Thank you, sir.
All right, everybody, we are off to a very quick commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking more about the pushback the Biden administration is facing over the SEC's new rule on reporting greenhouse emissions with Mark Mills. He's the senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and faculty fellow at Northwestern University's McCormick School of Engineering. Stay with us, and we'll see you on the other side of these commercials.
Welcome back, everybody. It is so clear from the news of the last few days that climate change is affecting every part of our country, not the actual climate change, the debate over it. That's right, whether it's the future of our auto industry, which President Trump tried to address this weekend, or in the High Court, where we're headed towards another big ruling on the powers of the regulatory state to dive into climate change when Congress never gave those federal bureaucrats that power. Well, we've got the perfect person to walk us through all this incredible history of the last few days. Mark Mills is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and faculty fellow at Northwestern University's McCormick School of Engineering. He's one of our favorites when it comes to this topic. Mark, great to have you back on the show.
Great to be back. A quick correction. I'm still with the Manhattan Institute as a contributing editor of the Great City Journal, but I'm now with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, launching a new project, which we'll talk about on another segment.
How about that? All right, little news there. Well, Mark, I want to start with something that came up over the weekend. There's obviously the conduct of the media that's a big part of this in kind of misinterpreting or the bloodbath comment that President Trump said. But what's really interesting is what the point President Trump was making is a point that the Congressional Budget Office and the Congressional Research Service have been trying to make to Congress, which is the EV revolution in America is about to destroy a large number of jobs in the auto industry. Tell us what you know. I mean, I think there was a recent CS report that really hit this on the head, didn't it?
Well, what we're learning is that electric vehicles, EVs, are an exciting niche product, more important than the sports cars, if you like, or off-road vehicles that people like. It's a big niche product. What we're learning is not the vehicle for everybody. I mean, just technically speaking, to put it in simplistic terms, they on average cost more, they are harder to fuel, and they so far have lower reliability. But they're kind of fun to drive, and there's a lot of advantages for certain classes of customers, but they're not a vehicle for everybody. That's what we're learning. So this whole push to make EVs be the only vehicle you're allowed to own or buy or operate, which is the direction of the Inflation Reduction Act and the administration, it's pretty obvious, I think, to analysts and now automakers that it's a very dangerous path economically for the businesses and, frankly, geopolitically, given the supply chain for them, and politically for those who are pushing it, because consumers really do care about access to affordable transportation.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah. And they are fun until you try to drive from Los Angeles to Phoenix, which don't ask me why I'm so personally perturbed about that ability. With respect to EVs, though,
details. Come on, Amanda.
Right. Yes. I wasn't given the details, first of all, of the range, and that's how I got into this problem to begin with. Sir, we are seeing this industry, the EV industry, going down a path where the American people are not accepting of it, and the government yet is still pushing it. Typically, when that happens, whether it's financial institutions or the car industry, there's a bailout coming. Do you foresee at some point in the future that having to happen for EV car manufacturers?
Well, I think clearly that's the risk. And I think that the auto industries, frankly, are taking a very big gamble. The idea that you can make EVs as inexpensive as conventional cars is mythological. They cost more. It's now well known that Ford and GM and others are losing billions of dollars trying to manufacture inexpensive EVs. They can't. It's going to be a very, very long time before they're at price parity. So if they do this and they're pushed to do it, they run the risk that they will face bankruptcy at a point in time when Congress and a president in the not too distant future will bail them out or might not. I mean, the third time may not be lucky. This is, we've had two bailout periods in modern history for the auto industry. Third time that might not happen again. To say it would be a shame understates the tragedy of the loss of one or more of the major industries of America to ill-advised policies. I think it's very, very high risk.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mark, you do a great job of making common sense out of a debate that often feels like it's driven by emotion. But one of the things that the Democrats want to push for decoupling fossil fuels from our economy. But the truth of the matter is when you look at GDP and energy go hand in hand, don't they?
Well, it's even more dramatic than that. So when we say the word energy, people have a lot of things in their heads. Let's be specific and pick the piñata of all the energy industries, which is the big oil industry, oil, hydrocarbons, liquid hydrocarbons. Last year, if we look at the data, this is just data. Words matter, but the Data really matters. There is a 1-to-1 correlation between per capita wealth in a country and per capita oil use. Or put differently, if you live in a wealthier country, you're using more oil. If you live in a poorer country, it's because you're using less oil. This is not a casual correlation, it's a causal correlation.
Mark, there is a colloquial phrase out there on the internet, tweeting through the ratio, when someone knows that they're doing something that's ultimately destructive and they just keep barreling down. With respect to the electric push, we are now seeing, United Auto Workers coming out saying, I'm not supporting Biden. He got rid of my friend's job on day one. Obviously, the pipeline, stomping on that by Biden. Isn't this kind of counterproductive and counter to his future for a second term?
Yeah, it's a very tough balancing act. I mean, I understand. I mean, look, so call me cynical, but also practical. I mean, I have a podcast called The Last Optimist, so I'll tell you something about my biases. But I'm also a bit of a political cynic. I have some sympathy. I mean, his backers want him to promote the, quote, energy transition, to abandon hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal. And at the same time, any efforts to do that are economically destructive. So you want to push off the economic destruction as far as possible in the future after an election. And that's, as everybody knows, what the release of all the oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was about, to tamp down potential for rising in oil and gasoline prices. And it worked. It helped do that, of course. So it's a very tough balancing. I think the administration probably does understand the risks, political risks and economic risks. This is why there's a little bit of a go slow in practice with the deployment of a lot of these things. Even the EPA's about to be released effectively a mandate to require 2/3 of all cars to be electric powered by the year 2032 or so. That's, you think about it, that's 8 years away. And as a practical matter, automakers won't be forced to change their production lines for a few years. They do it about 5 or 6 years in advance. So you're kicking the can down the road far enough, again, cynically pointing out, to not affect the election today. So you talk about the aspirations politically, but the rubber meets the road, no pun intended, or maybe a pun intended. A couple of years from now, whoever happens to be unlucky enough to be the president when the rubber meets the road and automakers start to collapse in trying to meet the mandate.
Yeah, it's a real threat. It's a very scary thing. Real quick, we got about a minute left. You just wrote a great op-ed that reminds us that energy security is not only tied to economic security, it's tied to national security, the energy to prevent and prosecute wars. What was that about?
Well, Germany is in the process of deindustrializing. And as you know, the European Union, led by President Macron, recently said that they need to step up, not just to spend money, meet their NATO commitments, but to, in the words of some analysts there, to convert their car factories into tank factories. They're being both realistic and simplistic. That takes not just money, it takes industrial capacity. The brutalization of the industrial sector in Europe comes almost entirely from high energy prices and restricted energy availability. So they're deindustrializing at exactly the same time. They need more industries based on cheap energy. Cheap energy means literally cheap oil, gas, and coal, not cheap wind. Many of the things you have to do to
Mark,
make steel.
I hate to do this to you. We're about to hit a hard commercial break, and you were just making the point I wanted you to get to. We're going to get you back on real soon. You do some of the best work in this sector anywhere in the country. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back, America. Over the weekend, concerns of anti-Semitism at another Ivy League school hit the news cycle, this time a repeat offender, unfortunately, over at Cornell University. A group aimed at combating anti-Semitism mailed a brochure to Jewish high school students in the greater New York area, warning them that Cornell is not a safe place for Jewish students. Joining us now to talk about this story is Cornell University law professor and founder of the Equal Protection Project, William Jacobson. Professor, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Sir, when this first came to a head, we had you on the show last year, and I thought that things would have improved since then, or at least remained stagnant. It actually seems like things are getting worse.
Well, the temperature on the campus is heating up a lot. There's been a lot of controversy on the campus, not just about the threats and things like that last fall, but students kind of marauding through the library with bullhorns, that's a hot topic. The administration's trying to place reasonable time and place restrictions on where people can do that sort of thing. And there's a lot of pushback from the students. So I would say that the temperature on the campus really hasn't calmed down. We haven't had the type of threats that we had last fall, where someone actually got arrested by the FBI, but it's not a great situation.
So I want to ask a little bit about the contribution to the debate that the White House is making. There's a lot of anti-Israel, a lot of anti-Jewish rhetoric that's coming out of the White House from the vice president, from some of the cabinet members, and certainly even the president himself agreeing with some of the comments last week. Does that throw a little more heat onto this fire that's already burning on campuses?
Well, I really think it does, because the president and Kamala Harris and Blinken, they all set a tone, and they all set a tone that Israel deserves to be ostracized. The rhetoric that's been coming out has been pretty severe, and particularly by Chuck Schumer. And so you take all of it. I'm not saying that they have caused the problem on campus, but they definitely contribute to it by trying to isolate and demonize and, frankly, dehumanize Israel, as if Israel is the only one who's contributing to the problems in the Middle East. And we know that that's just not true, but they're singling Israel out. That feeds the activists on campus who also want to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Professor, why does it seem like this major issue of anti-Semitism seems to be percolating the most on elite campuses? You hear about it so much more often at Ivy League schools than you do, smaller universities across the country.
It's true. Somebody once mentioned, and I think it's true, have you seen any of these problems at community colleges? No, you haven't, because people are actually busy learning a trade or a career or something like that. There's been a rot in elite academia that's been building for multiple decades. I've been talking about it. I'm sure you've been talking about it on your show, but it's really come to a head really post George Floyd, with the aggressive push for what they euphemistically call diversity, equity, and inclusion, but really is a racialization of the campus. And in that paradigm of the racialization of the campus, the student activists and the faculty activists isolate Israel as the white supremacist, white imperialist, white colonialist entity that is the object of their hate. And that's really what's feeding a lot of this, is that Israel, much like Jews have been singled out for centuries as the obsession of hate, now Israel has been singled out by student activists and many faculty and some administrations as the object of hate. And that necessarily impacts the Jewish students on campus, the vast majority of whom are strong supporters of Israel.
Yeah, that's amazing. So one of the challenges that's been had is defining exactly how anti-Semitism, what anti-Semitism is from a legal standpoint. Today in Indiana, a really great example that the Indiana governor signed a proclamation condemning anti-Semitism, but then he vetoed a bill that would have given it a specific definition as it came to the education code. Is the definition still a struggle point for getting this right legally?
Well, I think it is. I think it's a struggle point for getting it right on campuses culturally, because the reality is that modern anti-Semitism in this century masquerades itself as anti-Zionism. And the definition that most people want to use, and I think it's been recognized in many governments and hundreds of organizations around the world, right, is the International Holocaust Remembrance definition, which says that criticism of Israel, like you would criticize any other country, is not anti-Semitism. But when you take it to such an extreme that you demonize Israel in ways you would never do for other countries similarly situated, the reality is, in this century, that is the face of anti-Semitism. So the fact that they're refusing to recognize that and refusing to define it makes it very hard to fight, against this, because the response is, well, yes, we're demonizing Israel. We're declaring them a pariah in the world. We're only doing it to them, which happens to be the only Jewish majority state, but it's not anti-Semitism. But we know that in reality, that's not true. So I think that's terrible in Indiana that they cut the guts out of the bill.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sir, last year at the height of this controversy, there were a number of major law firms who came out and said that they were going to cease recruiting from universities like Harvard Do you think that, first of all, have they followed through on that? And also, do you think that that is effective?
I don't think it was nearly as widespread as was reported in many places. I think there might have been one or two firms, and I don't think they were top tier firms, the firms that most students want to go to. So I think that was overblown, frankly. I don't know that that would be an effective remedy anyway, because you're essentially punishing everybody at a law school for the actions of what is not a tiny minority, but a minority of the students. So I don't think that's going to be very effective. I'm not sure what will be effective. I think part of what would be effective is if we had more diversity of viewpoint, particularly among the faculty. Much like conservatives have not been hired essentially for 30 years in academia, so academia is completely left-oriented. Pro-Israel professors don't get hired either. If you look at all the recent hires, and there's a controversial one in the news in the last few days at Cornell, if you are anti-Israel, if you are vigorously anti-Israel, that's a plus mark when you're applying in academia. If you have anything on your record that shows you're pro-Israel, you won't get hired. So what you have on campuses is, just like you have very few conservative professors, you have very few openly pro-Israel professors. And that's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed and that won't be solved by refusing to hire from that law school.
Good point.
Diversity of thought, more ideas, more speech, that is always the solution. And I think you're spot on about that, Professor. No doubt. Very, very wise. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. We're going to have you back on again very soon. All right, everybody. John and I, we've got to take a very quick commercial break, but we're going to be speaking with Mike Davis, the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, about the Supreme Court's response to the Murthy v. Missouri case. Stick around. We've got a lot of legal news coming out, like drinking water from a fire hose. We're going to get to all of it with Mike Davis.
Welcome back, America. Earlier today, the Supreme Court considered two very important cases that will define an entire generation of how free speech is implemented in America. We're going to turn to that in a second, but first, a little breaking news. Just a few moments ago, President Trump and some of his defendants in the Georgia criminal case have asked the judge for permission to appeal his ruling that has allowed District Attorney Fani Willis to stay in charge of that January 6th case in Fulton County, Georgia. We have the perfect first guest to get us started tonight. He's going to weigh in on all the great developments at the Supreme Court, plus what we just heard a few seconds ago. He is Mike Davis, president and founder of the Article 3 Project, and one of our favorites when it comes to sorting out the law. Mike, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start with the breaking news. President Trump clearly not satisfied, and a lot of people weren't satisfied with the judge's ruling last Friday. Do you think on appeal this is going to have a different outcome?
It should have a different outcome because Fulton County DA Fani Willis had an actual conflict of interest. It is absolutely illegal for a prosecutor to have a financial stake in a criminal prosecution. And that is exactly what Fani Willis has in this unprecedented criminal prosecution against President Trump and 18 others under a bogus RICO theory. She hired her illegal secret boyfriend, Nathan Wade, who's not qualified to run a RICO case. She paid him $250 an hour. He colluded with the Biden White House twice, including the White House counsel, before she brought this unprecedented indictment. He billed 24 hours in a single day. And then in return, Nathan Wade took his girlfriend/boss, Fani Willis, on these lavish trips to Napa, the Caribbean, Belize. That is a clear conflict of interest. It's clearly bribery. It's clearly perjury, subornation of perjury, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, gift ban violation. She should clearly be off this case. But this Fulton County Superior Court judge, Scott McAfee, is this young judge who was appointed by Governor Kemp, no fan of President Trump, Kemp. He's up for election this year. The Democrats put up a challenger while he was considering this motion to dismiss, this motion to disqualify. And if he followed the law, he followed the facts, followed the law, he should have disqualified. But I think he blinked to the political pressure. So the appellate court is going to have to fix this.
Yeah.
Mike, what I don't understand is it didn't have to get here. Her relationship with this case has been problematic, pretty widely considered problematic since the beginning. Governor Brian Kemp, AG Chris Carr, somewhere along the way, it didn't even have to get here. What should they have done?
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene back in January, submitted a criminal referral to both Governor Kemp and Attorney General Chris Carr in Georgia, citing the clear statutory authority, the statutory duty that the governor and the attorney general have to open a criminal probe on Fulton County DA Fani Willis for the overwhelming evidence of bribery, perjury, subornation of perjury, witness tampering, gift ban violations. They haven't done a damn thing. And you have to ask why. Are they going to put their hatred of President Trump above their duty as the governor and the attorney general to uphold the law, to enforce the law? Do we really want a corrupt district attorney in the biggest county in Georgia?
Yeah, so important. So important. Mike, I want to turn to the Supreme Court. Two big cases, the NRA case, the Missouri free speech case. Got to look at the justices' thinking on a lot of this important decision-making that's really going to define how free speech is carried out in America, whether disinformation becomes a term for censorship in the future. Tell us what you read from the way the court played things out today.
Well, the Supreme Court is hearing two very important free speech cases, and it's about how much pressure or coercion the government is allowed to put on private actors to discriminate against Americans based upon their political viewpoint, whether it is the Murphy versus Missouri case where the Biden administration worked with these big tech platforms to censor Americans based upon they called COVID misinformation by doctors and scientists that ended up being right. How many people unnecessarily suffered and died because scientists were stifled in the scientific debates. And then we also have in the New York case where this New York insurance and bank regulator is putting pressure on New York banks and insurance carriers not to work with the National Rifle Association. So the Supreme Court is going to have to come out with a test on how much these government actors can collude with private actors to censor Americans.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about one of the lines of questioning from Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. So she said that she was worried that about the hamstringing of Fed's censorship efforts. I'm actually worried about the opposite of that, because isn't that the point of the First Amendment?
Yeah, what a shocking question by a Supreme Court justice, that she's worried that the First Amendment to the Constitution could get in the way of the government. Newsflash, Ketanji, that's the whole point of the Constitution. The Constitution is a loan agreement between we the people and our governments, federal government, state government, local government. We loan the government specific enumerated and separated powers. In return, the government is supposed to protect our liberties. She has that turned on its head. She has the Constitution from a shield that protects us from the government into a sword that the government uses to come after us. That is a very dangerous mindset by a Supreme Court justice. And maybe going forward, we should stop picking Supreme Court justices based upon their skin pigments or their sex and start picking them based upon their intellect and their judgments.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, another thing, just a little bit ago, Supreme Court Justice Alito extending the temporary hold on the Texas law that would allow it to, at the state level, arrest illegal immigrants. What do you think's going on there? We got about a minute left.
Well, I mean, I think that it's pretty routine for Alito to grant these requests. He probably talked to his colleagues on the court, and they try not to politicize these emergency requests for injunctions. But I'll tell you what, President Biden has intentionally opened our border and illegally imported 10 million illegal immigrants into this country, including unvetted and unvettable, dangerous illegal immigrants from dangerous places, including illegal immigrants who are bringing measles and tuberculosis and other very dangerous diseases into our country. And if the federal government is not going to protect us from this invasion, these states are stepping up to protect us from this invasion. And if the states aren't going to do it and the federal government's not going to do it, who the hell's going to do it?
Yeah, that is the question. Security, health, and safety all on the front lines of that debate, and no response from the federal government. Mike, as always, a great honor to have you on the show, my friend. Thanks for joining us and making sense of a very busy legal day.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you on. All right, folks, it's hard to believe, but we've come to the end of the show already. Man, I didn't even get a chance to have our normal conversation. I promise you, we will get back there tomorrow. There'll be no problem. We'll do that. In the meantime, we're going to hand off to our good friend, Grant Stanchfeld. He's going to take you to the next hour. A lot of breaking news. You're in good hands.